You have seen this number. Ancient humans became parents at 12. It turns up in documentaries, in comment sections, in half the history videos online. Repeated so often and so confidently that almost nobody stops to check it. So let us check it properly. Because when you go looking for the evidence, the number falls apart almost immediately. Start with the most obvious problem. 12 is a modern number. 12 is roughly when a well-fed young person in a wealthy country finishes growing up today. Steady calories every single day. Clean water. No parasites. No hungry season. That is a historically bizarre way to grow up. Push a growing body into harder conditions, and that clock slides later. In poorly nourished populations, the same milestone arrives closer to 16 or 17. European records from 2 centuries ago put the average at around 16 and a half. It has been falling ever since, and it is still falling now. So the number in the headline is not the ancient number at all. It is the number our own abundance produced. And there is a second problem, which is much bigger than the first. Finishing growing up and being able to safely carry a child are not the same event. There is a gap between them, and biologists have a name for it. For the first few years after that milestone, the body's monthly cycle is often irregular. Capable in principle, genuinely unreliable in practice. There is a reason for that delay, and it is skeletal. The pelvis is the last major part of the body to finish growing. It keeps widening for years after the growth spurt everywhere else is finished. A body that could conceive early is still carrying a frame that is unfinished. With no surgery and no hospital anywhere in the world, that is not a small detail. It is the difference between a birth and a funeral. So evolution built in a lag. Capability first. Reliability several years later, once the frame has caught up. Which means the honest biological answer to the question is not 12. It is somewhere in the late teens, before culture has said a single word. But you do not have to take that from theory. Because there are people alive right now whose way of life is the closest thing we have. Not a museum reconstruction. Measured, documented, counted, year after year. And the numbers they produce are the most useful thing in this entire question. The Hadza live in northern Tanzania and still get much of their food by foraging. Anthropologists have tracked their births across decades. The average age at first birth among Hadza mothers is about 19. Among the San of southern Africa, it is roughly 19 to 20. Not 12, not 13, 19. And these are the populations that most closely resemble the ancestral pattern. Everyone who lived before farming lived by moving and gathering. That is not a fringe case. That is almost the whole of human history. So why 19? Because a way of life built on walking sets a hard limit on children. Anyone too small to keep up has to be carried. Carried, along with the food, the water, the tools, and the firewood. One small bundle at a time is manageable. 2 is not. So births in foraging groups space themselves out, 3 to 4 years apart. Long breastfeeding does part of that spacing on its own. Constant walking and a lean body do the rest. A group living like this does not want a very young mother. It cannot feed the result. There is no surplus. There is no storehouse. There is what was found today. So the pattern for most of human existence looks nothing like the headline. Late teens, widely spaced children, small families that stayed small. Then, about 12,000 years ago, all of it broke. People stopped following food around and started growing it in one place. Within a few thousand years, the entire calculation inverted. Start with the carrying problem, because farming simply deletes it. If you never move, you never have to carry anyone anywhere. The natural break on how close together children could arrive is gone. Then there is the food itself, and this part matters more than it sounds. Grain can be ground into a soft mash that a very small child can eat. which means weaning happens much earlier than it used to. Breastfeeding stops sooner, and the next pregnancy arrives sooner. Birth spacing collapses from about 4 years down to about 2. Family size doubles without a single person deciding anything. And then the deepest change of all, children stopped being a cost. On a farm, a small child is genuinely useful from about the age of 6. Scaring birds off the crop, hauling water, watching the goats, minding a baby. By early adolescence, they are doing adult work at adult hours. A foraging child is a mouth for years. A farm child is a pair of hands. More children now means more harvest later. And that is the moment a very young parent becomes economically attractive. Not biologically, economically. Land made it considerably worse. Foragers own what they can carry. Farmers own a field that cannot be moved. Which means for the first time in history, inheritance matters. Who gets the land? Whose children? In what order? And marriage stops being about two people at all. It becomes a contract between two families over property. A settlement, a treaty, sometimes a debt being paid off. Once that is true, the age written into the agreement becomes a negotiating term. Sealed earlier, the alliance lasts longer and produces heirs sooner. Bride price, dowry, betrothal. This is the vocabulary of a transaction. This is where the number 12 actually comes from. Not from deep prehistory, from property. And it is worth being blunt about what that actually means. Treating a daughter as an asset to be traded is exploitation. It caused enormous harm then, and where it survives, it causes enormous harm now. Explaining why something happened is not the same as defending it. The logic can be entirely real, and the practice can still be indefensible. There is one more pressure behind all of this, and it is the coldest one. In pre-modern populations, somewhere between a quarter and half of children died before 5. Fever, a gut infection, a bad winter, a failed harvest. Now run the arithmetic that every farming household was quietly running. To simply hold a population steady, each couple needs 2 surviving children. If half do not reach 5, you need 4 births to keep 2. And if adult life expectancy is short, those 4 births need room to happen. Start late, and there may simply not be time. That is not a moral position. It is a subtraction problem. And it explains why the pressure pointed the same way for thousands of years. But here is the part the headline always leaves out. A very young mother in that world was almost never on her own. She lived inside a household of 3 or 4 generations at once. Grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, cousins, in-laws, neighbors. People who had done all of this repeatedly and who were standing right there. Anthropologists have measured this. A grandmother nearby raises a child's odds of survival. It is a large enough effect to help explain why humans live so long past their fertile years. Almost no other animal on Earth does that. So the knowledge in the hands did not come from the young parent at all. They came from the building she lived in. Which is exactly why none of this transfers to the present day. The support structure is what made it survivable, and the support structure is gone. A young parent today is far more likely to be alone with a baby in a flat. No grandmother in the next room. No aunt on the same floor. The economics have flipped completely as well. A child on a farm was a worker. A child now is 2 decades of expense. And leaving school early to raise one costs a lifetime of earnings. The biology, meanwhile, has not changed at all. The parts of the brain that handle planning and impulse control still mature into the mid-20s. That was just as true in the Stone Age as it is today. The difference is that ancient societies built scaffolding around that gap. Ours does not, and it does not pretend to. So the same act sits inside a completely different world. Which is also why the practice did not end, because people simply became kinder. It fell as child mortality fell, almost exactly in step. When children reliably survive, there is no arithmetic left to justify it. So, did ancient humans really become parents at 12? Overwhelmingly, no. For the first 300,000 years, the answer was much closer to 19. The very young parent is not our deep past. It arrives with the field, the granary, and the inheritance. It is roughly 10,000 years old, not 300,000. A rule written by property, then repeated until it started to sound like nature. 12 was never the human number. It was the farm's number. If that changed the number in your head, drop a 19 in the comments.